everybody. I just wanted to do a brief talk today on the Vargas, or the divisional charts of Vedic astrology. I say brief talk, but sometimes I get going and just get so deeply into it that it ends up being a little bit longer than usual. So we'll see how long it goes. But one thing I had noticed through teaching my classes is that a lot of people don't really know how to use the Vargas or the divisional charts adequately. There's a lot of people who know how to use the Rashi chart and the Navamsha chart, but Parashara spoke mainly of 16 Varga charts, the Ashadha Vargas, and certainly there are more than that, but 16 are the ones that are mainly used. And so if it's in Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, then certainly there must be some utilization to these other Varga charts, right? And most certainly there is. And each Varga chart we want to look at for a specific thing. Now, I'm not going to go deeply into the specific things that are connected to each particular Varga chart because that's a point for something that's much longer winded, and that's actually something that I'm going to be covering in my extensive Varga course, which if you want to register for that course, there should be a link below on this page that can take you to the course page for further information. And equally, if you would like to schedule a consultation with me, there's also a link to my astrological services page below. But let's talk a little bit about the Vargas and how important they are really, because there are different Varga charts for different things, right? Let's take, for example, the Rashi chart or the main chart. I bet you didn't know that was a Varga chart too. It is. And it's associated with the number one. What is the number one? Well, on some levels, it's the self. It's the body. It's the individual's perspective on the life path that they're going through. So the Rashi chart is very important. Let's take another chart, which is the Dwadashamsha chart, which is primarily used to understand one's ancestors, right? So if you see something coming up that's mother-related or father-related in a chart, you might want to go take a look at the Dwadashamsha and see what's going on with that. Then we've got, for instance, the Navamsha, which a lot of people do know how to use the Navamsha. And most certainly the Navamsha can give you a lot of ideas about the general inner workings of an individual. But it's also the things that that individual finds purpose in, because it's going to be very similar to the ninth house, which particular direction the individual is going to follow. Which ashram they're going to follow, if you will. Are they going to be on the marriage path, which is one of the things the Navamsha is used for? Are they going to be on the spiritual lifestyle path, or are they going to be a householder? These are all things we can look at through the Navamsha chart. Then you've got the Dashamsha chart, which a lot of people look at for career, but actually it's much more than that. And if you look purely at the Dashamsha chart just to see career, you might get a lot of inaccurate information, because basically the Dashamsha chart is spoken of as being the chart that shows the great fruit. So it's about the successes that we have, because it's very 10th house oriented. So I'm not going to go into each of the Varga charts because I just kind of want to illustrate a point with this today. And for this, I have chosen a chart that is of person X. This was just a randomly created chart, not connected with anybody. I just wanted to put particular planets together in particular places, and so I created it this way. But let's take a look at this, and let's see that we are presently in this chart in Saturn, Jupiter. Let's go down a few levels, because I remembered seeing when I was looking at this chart the Saturn, Jupiter, Venus period, which would have happened earlier on this year. And let's use that as a point of reference. So understanding dashas, well, I tell you what, before we get into dashas, let's look over here at these charts in the corner that have these random numbers in it. What this is it's a way of mathematically quantifying one planet's impact upon another. This particular technique is also going to be taught on my Varga course. So that'll be like a course within the course. So I highly recommend you register for it if you want to learn about this. But for today's purposes, the black numbers are the latent strength of the planet as determined through the Baladi Avastas, Jagradati Avastas. And then incorporating the Lajatati Avastas with that, where we see the green numbers, the red numbers, and the blue numbers, that's one planet's influence upon another. So say, for instance, we wanted to see the moon's influence upon Mars. We would find the Mars column and the moon row and go over. And there we see a 185 number and a 593. And what that means is basically the moon gives 185 points of its strength to Mars to boost Mars's strength to 593 points, right? Where you see red numbers, that's one planet damaging another for one reason or another. And all of that will be taught in terms of the rationale behind it in the Lajatati Avasta section of the course. So as you can see, you've got some numbers that are, red on top. Like we said before, the moon can damage Mercury by 67.3 points and reduce Mercury's 108 points to 40 points, right? And Mars here can damage Saturn by 407 points and take Saturn's 315 points and reduce it to a negative balance. Now, the negative balance bit is important because when a planet ends up being reduced to a negative balance, what ends up happening is it cannot maintain its responsibilities to its houses, its house cusps, if you work with house cusps, which for the purposes of today, I'm going to be showing you with house cusps enabled, and equally the nakshatras that it rules. It tends to have an effect on that as well. So those are all things that we need to look at in a particular set of circumstances. So if we're seeing green numbers, that planet's getting supported. If we're seeing red numbers, that planet is getting damaged. If that planet is at a 0 or beneath, then that planet has a hard time fulfilling the responsibilities to its house cusps. Okay, that's all we need to know for today's purposes. But taking a brief look at this chart, we can see Saturn and Jupiter. Okay, so looking at that, here are some things that we might notice. So let's think Saturn and Jupiter. So we can see Saturn as Lord of the second and third house. What does that tell us? So these are the second and third house cusps. So there are equal houses and their house cusps. And if you work with them both in tandem, you get a lot of interesting information and a lot more depth. And that's why I do that. But if we're using the house cusps, we can see the potential for family, which is a second house thing. We could also see finances, but let's think of the family side of it. And we could also see the potential for siblings, right? So we're seeing something with family potentially and with siblings. When we look at Jupiter, we're seeing something fourth house related. So we are thinking on one level, mother. Now I tell you what, I'm going to bring up the Jaimini Karakas that are associated with the particular planets, if I can access it without touching my head here. Did that work? There we go. Let's move it over just a little bit more. Let's put it up here. And we can see that Jupiter is the Dara Karaka. Well, Saturn just naturally creates obstructions. So we could see there could be a problem with one spouse during this particular time too. So those are all hints that we're getting from the Rashi chart, which is the individual walking down their path, the self encountering their consciousness, right? And the Varga charts give a lot more of the subtleties of the different areas of life. So let's start with family-related things, okay? And I'm going to bring up a chart that is pretty extensive in terms of showing everything that a planet is connected to within a particular Varga chart. It's a very useful chart. And so glad to have Kala, which is what this software is, so that one can do these things, right? Now, as I do this, I'm going to have to move my head. So let's move my head over here. Great. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look at this table called Mutual Agenda. So it will show everything that a planet is connected with in a particular Varga chart. So we were seeing Saturn, Jupiter, and Venus. So let's see what all those things are pointing to. So we see, first of all, if we look at Saturn, Saturn has a latent strength of 0 points in this chart. That means some problems for Saturn, some problems with being productive in relation to its house gust. And that happens because Saturn is Sushupti, and he's in a great enemy sign. So those are things we need to keep in mind. So we're seeing primarily, we're seeing 6th, 7th, and 9th houses. We'll touch more on these in a second. And we're seeing 3rd and 12th. Let's look at everything in general. So the 6th, the 7th, and the 9th, the 6th and the 9th can show us on one level potential stress with one's father. It also shows potential separation or distance from one's siblings. And we're seeing conflict mixed in with all of this. So there can be some stress. And here we can see Saturn disposits the Natikaraka. Equally, it's the 3rd and 4th from the Brahtikaraka, 3rd and 4th Rashi Lord from the Brahtikaraka, which is Saturn. Not wanting to go too deeply into it to confuse people, right? But Saturn rules the 3rd and 4th from itself, and Saturn's the Brahtikaraka, the indicator of siblings. So we can see that has something to do with siblings. If we look at the Pitrikaraka, which is father, we see the 1st and the 12th. So there can be some issues surrounding one's father, especially because Saturn doesn't have any strength to maintain those areas. Equally, there can be issues around one's siblings. Now, if we go further into this, we can see that Jupiter is the 2nd, 10th, and 11th house lord, okay? So this says family, right? The importance that one gives to family, because the 10th house, equally being the house that's directly above at the time of one's birth, is where one places the things of prominence. And the 10th house is also the karma bhava. So it's how we, to kind of summarize that, it's how we apply our energy to a particular area. That's the 10th, okay? So it's the importance that we might give to one's family. Then we look at Venus, but here's something else too. We see the 5th house, so that has to do with, children or one's childhood, and we see the 8th house, other people's resources. We can see there might potentially be an inheritance issue going on here. So then we come down here and we see Venus, and we're seeing the 8th house again. That's interesting. We're seeing the 5th house again too. And we're seeing the 10th, and we're seeing siblings come into the equation, right? So Venus is giving some good energy to siblings, whereas the other two, they're not really helping to support that. So one is trying to work something out with one's siblings, but this is likely some problems over an inheritance showing, because as we notice, Venus is hurting Jupiter, right? So that makes it so it's difficult for Jupiter to handle its responsibilities to the finance houses related to ancestors and towards an inheritance and towards putting family first. So there could be a little bit of quibbling in regards to siblings. That's one thing that we're seeing here, but we might not see that from the Rashi chart. If we look at the Rashi chart, let's look at some of the things we might see. Okay, so we're seeing Saturn in the 6th house. Okay, so we can see some stress with one of one's siblings because Saturn, as the 3rd lord, is in the 6th house. So that's showing there, but we don't fully know the nature of it just looking at the Rashi chart, right? We see Jupiter, that can be, associated with the 4th, right? Which can be connected to one's mother and father, family, and when one was a child, and some sort of conflict resulting from that. But the 4th is also fortune, right? So it might have something to do with fortune or one's security. So we're seeing hints here, but we don't get the full story until we go to the Dwadashamsha chart and we back it up. Okay, so that's just one short example. Let's look equally at potential stress with one's spouse during this time, because we see Saturn, Jupiter. We're in a Saturn-Jupiter period, and Venus is also in the equation too. That's an important indicator for relationships. but Jupiter is the Dara Karaka, and it's the natural Karaka of spouse for women. Saturn can just naturally create obstruction. So Saturn, as we saw, let's look at what everybody's connected with again here in the Rashi chart. Actually, before we do that, let's look at everybody's strength. Okay, so you've got Jupiter because of Jupiter's placement in Libra, which is an enemy sign. You've got Jupiter being Sushupti, so it has no strength. You've got a good, solid, strong Venus, right, that has quite a lot of its Shadbala. And you've got Saturn debilitated because it's in Aries, so it is equally Sushupti, so it has none of its strength, right? And there's a lot of videos circulating out there on the Avastas if you want to learn a little bit more about this. But I also will be teaching this on my course, how to work with these particular numbers and everything. But today I'm just wanting to give you a general idea. So what we can see is we can see Venus will hurt Jupiter because it's a sub-period of Jupiter. And Venus will help Saturn. Venus will help Saturn. So going back to the previous thing, that's actually, I'm sorry, Venus will not help Saturn. So scratch that, because Venus is the sub-period of Jupiter. Saturn would have to be, it would have to be Saturn-Venus. I just got confused there for a moment. So with Venus being the sub-period of Jupiter, Venus is hurting Jupiter. Jupiter doesn't give any of its strength to Saturn. And even if it did, Jupiter has no strength to give to Saturn. Okay, so I'm keeping it simple with that because I don't want to confuse the process too much, because this is mainly about the Vargas today. So when we're looking at that, we see Venus hurting Jupiter and everything Jupiter is related to. So when we go and we look at our mutual agenda table, as we were seeing, we saw some problems over one's security or happiness. There can be some relationship problems. Thinking of the future of the relationship, perhaps going needing a little bit of space and freedom to sort through some things, right? And whether that's going to make it feel that the relationship is just too difficult to handle and one might want to go their separate ways, that's yet to be shown, but it's potentially likely because we look down here, we see the 8th, the 7th, and the 12th being involved. So some sort of separation from a relationship is a potential that's happening there, and we're also in Saturn, Jupiter. So let's see if that's substantiated in the Navamsha chart. Okay? So we'll bring up another layer, and we'll also look at the Saptamsha too. Both are important to relationships. Just defining the difference between the two, the Navamsha is the purpose, the cohesion, if you will, behind the relationship. The Saptamsha is the co-creative aspect of the relationship. Are the two being able to connect on their path with each other to even create that cohesion? That's probably the easiest way to describe it. So let's start with the Navamsha chart. Pardon me. So we can see Jupiter with none of its Shadbala to handle its house cusps. Okay, we'll touch on what those are here in a moment. We're seeing Venus with none of its Shadbala to help its house cusps. And we're seeing Saturn with some strength, right? So when we look at that, let's start with Saturn. Saturn has strength, and Saturn is associated with the 1st and the 2nd, the 4th and the 11th, so the future happiness of the relationship. Whether there's enough resources to strengthen the relationship. Many times when you see the 1st and 2nd together like this, it's a self-esteem issue. And when we're talking about relationships, a self-esteem issue, that can be personal, but it's also the esteem of the relationship. And that's something to look at in connection with that too. Jupiter saying, do they want to put effort into this? And there's potentially a lot of conflict, and we've got the 9th and the 12th there, so that's one sign that this might go its separate way. It might part and break up, because it wasn't really very correct grammar there, but you know, who cares? So then when we look at Venus, if the grammar police want to come in and put something down below on my poor grammar, that's absolutely fine, okay? So when we look at Venus, we see Venus being the 5th and the 10th, right? And the relationship going through some changes because of the 7th and the 8th, the happiness of the relationship and some potential conflict that's going on there, and the capacity, because we see the 5th, there could be children involved with it. Are they so wrapped up in terms of their own struggle that they have a hard time putting the children first? And that's one potential thing that's showing here. But there's definitely some problems with the relationship, and it might break up. So then when we look at the mutual agenda of the Saptamsha table, if we look at Saturn, we've got Saturn with no Shadbala, we've got Jupiter with no Shadbala, and we've got Venus with strength. Okay? So we look at Saturn, we can see that this is going to be a change. We can go deeper with this for more details, but I'm just trying to keep it simple for the sake of this. So we see some change in the relationship. We see Jupiter. Jupiter has 4th agenda, 9th and 12th. So that's another one showing that there can be separation from one spouse, expressing conflict. That's another thing too. So this is showing a lot of change and a lot of stress. And we see Venus. We see Venus really hurting Jupiter. So that makes it more difficult. So something needs to be expressed that can create conflict. And it can create quite a lot of change in the relationship. And we notice Venus disposits Jupiter too. So there's quite a lot of change for relationships in this. So I just wanted to show this today just to kind of keep it brief. And I think we're going to stop there just to give you an idea that you can get things from the Rashi chart. And I'm not knocking the Rashi chart because the path an individual's on and their perspective of that is very important. And just touching briefly, if you see a seeming contradiction between a Varga chart and the Rashi chart, I'm going to explain that. First of all, there's not really contradictions in astrology, there's just complications. And I know that sounds really funny, but what I mean is, if you see two different things, it just means you're looking at a complex situation that has a couple of different layers of it. But if, for instance, a Varga chart that's related to a particular event shows a lot of strength in relation to that, but the Rashi chart shows weakness, well, it shows that there's potential. There's potential for that, but the individual is having a hard time getting that potential, which is up there in the ethers or somewhere in the back of their head or here in their heart, out there into their life in a concrete manner. So that can create some difficulties. So all the Vargas are important, and at a certain level, you want to interconnect the Vargas, right? And look at things on several different layers so you can give a well-rounded explanation. And that is something that we are going to learn on my Varga course. So again, if you want to register for that course, the link is below. You can register by semester or register for the full course. In addition, if you would like for me to look at your chart in this way or about any other question that you might have, please also feel free to schedule a consultation with me through the link below. So just a brief look at the Vargas. Today I could spend like a couple of hours talking about this, but usually when people watch YouTube videos, they're looking for 10-minute things, and I'm sure we've gone way over 10 minutes at this point. So that'll do it. Even though I know it seemed a little bit of a rush through the process, I just wanted to give a general idea of how, if you see something in the Rashi chart, it can drop a hint to you that there's a particular Varga chart that you need to look at in order to get a little bit more of the story. And that's the importance of the Varga charts, right? And how, if you're doing astrology just based on the Rashi chart, you might get a lot of inaccuracies. And if you're doing astrology just based on the Rashi chart and the Navamsha chart, unless you're looking at a marriage issue or a purpose-related issue, you might get some inaccuracies. And that's why it's important to go and look at all the relevant Varga charts in association with each particular event. And I can't help myself, I need to add one thing. There is also a system through Parashara astrology where you can understand the connection between different Varga charts, how Varga charts are kind of grouped together to relate to particular types of things. So there might be several Varga charts you want to check for each particular type of event, as you just saw me looking at marriage-related things through the Navamsha and the Saptamsha chart. So astrology on one level is about so many things, but one of the things that it's about is about putting all of these things together so you can give a well-rounded explanation of things. So that's going to do it for this brief look. If you do want to register for the course, again, the link is below, or it's further down on the page, and also my consultation link is there too. Thank you. Bye now.